welcome to another episode of Cath Lab Chat. I am your host with the most, Jeremy Miller. And this week we're going to talk about COVID and what it's done in the lab. And I think that obviously it's not really the disease I'm talking about so much as what has the disease done to our outpatient volumes, our patient volumes in general, and the effects that's kind of trickling down onto the lab, and what I think we can do to mitigate it, things I've attempted, so forth and so on. But right off the bat, I want to thank Jennifer out of Florida who wrote into me and got me started on this topic. I'm actually really passionate about this. I'm a union steward as well as lead tech, so I've been fighting for my guys to get as many hours as I can. And this is something I'm really passionate about. I've been at so many meetings trying to do everything I can, and it didn't even dawn on me to do a podcast about it. So here it is. Right into it, kind of. I'm going to guide a little bit of news. It's been a while, and I'm sure you guys have noticed that it's been a minute since the last podcast, and here's why. So we have a new little bundle of joy in our household. Baby number 2, Zoe. And so I've kind of taken a little bit of a break to kind of welcome the new one into the world. Super happy about that. Lots of sleepless nights. Gotta love being a dad, right? And we'll have a dad podcast too. I'm waiting on doing that one, but I'm super excited about it. So without any further ado, I apologize for the gap, but hey, you gotta take care of your kids. You gotta do what you gotta do. So let's get into it and start talking about the COVID shenanigans. So I think as we get into this, we really need to kind of address what it's done to the lab and what it's done to us. I can tell you I've lost a bunch of hours. I've not been feeling so hot about it. And I know that a lot of people are losing hours. Some of you are working in labs where you've already bounced back, and high five. Congratulations to you guys. I'm super happy for you. I couldn't be happier. I'm glad you guys are getting your hours back. Some places never really cut. And hey, great for you guys. But there's a lot of us out there that have been getting cut, and a lot. So I wanted to talk about some of the ways you can maybe mitigate that. But I also want to talk about how you're feeling. And I don't mean to get into some psychotherapy shenanigans, but we do a little bit. I can tell you that I've been pretty frustrated with it, and I think we need to kind of take a step back when we're in this place and figure out why we're frustrated. Because I think it's easy to say, I'm mad I'm not getting my hours. Well, I am mad I'm not getting my hours. In my particular scenario, I'm not as much worried about the paycheck so much as my ego. And I know that's not very kosher to say, but it's true. I've been doing what I've been doing for a long time. I bring a lot of value to the table. And I feel like I shouldn't be treated like a day laborer. And that really frustrates me. And that's really where a lot of my anxiety and my frustration comes from, is that, I go so far above and beyond to be really good at my job. I put a lot of effort in. I'm available a lot more than I should be. And I think about the lab a lot more than I should. I do a lot more research than maybe most. And I just generally really love what I do. And when it comes to, taking care of my coworkers and taking care of my patients and the team dynamic, it's important to me. And I think that losing my hours is just really pushing on all of these other nerves. And I have been not the greatest person at work lately because I've been so frustrated, and I've let it really get a hold of me. So kind of recognizing that is one of the steps into this. But I want to kind of send everybody away with this thought of like really trying to figure out why we are so frustrated. If it's financial and you're really struggling financial, I understand and I feel you, and maybe there is no thought that needs to happen. You're not getting your pay and you're frustrated. I think there's obviously more to that. Maybe, could have been a little bit more savvy with savings. Maybe there's other things to look into. I have a financial advisor. I'm not shy to tell you, my financial advisor has really helped turn me around. I don't have credit card debt anymore. That's a whole nother conversation for another day. But I can tell you that over the years, there has been a lot of steps to get me to the place that I am today, where I don't have to worry, because I was somebody in 2008 and 2009 during the last recession, 2010, where I was working or scheduled 60 hours a week between two hospitals and walking away with 25, 30 hours and barely making my mortgage payment. And I was really frustrated. And yeah, that is frustrating to be canceled 50% of the time. But I was really frustrated because I was making $35 an hour and I was having a hard time making a $700 mortgage payment. And if you do the math on that at $3 an hour for call, you really have a hard time figuring out how you can make almost $40 an hour and not be able to pay a mortgage payment, because that's really not a whole lot of days in a month to make it happen. And that was really frustrating time for me. And so I can tell you, I've been in your shoes if you're struggling financially right now. But I also want to use whatever it is that is happening with you right now as fuel, as to kind of use it as a blueprint to move forward. So what happened to me in Phoenix propelled me into traveling. I was really getting sent home quite a bit, and it forced me into an uncomfortable place of traveling, and it has been the greatest thing for me. So with all of this going on, where we're going with this one is, I think this is a great time to figure out what is triggering us as far as why we feel the way we do at work, and how to make sure that it doesn't bother us in the future and use this as a positive. For example, I'm looking into get my bachelor's. We'll see how that goes. That might be much more of a time commitment than I'm ready to give with two young kids at home. But maybe you want to get your certifications in Cath or IR or EP, so you feel more valuable. And then when this does turn around, you can name your price, or you can go elsewhere. Maybe you want to look into traveling, because I think the traveling is going to be where it's at after this is all done. I think there's going to be a lot of really dejected people who feel very betrayed by their hospital systems. And I think there's going to be a lot of the best and brightest making their way out. So I would definitely think about maybe setting up my lifestyle for when that comes around. I know there's a lot of travelers at home right now, but I really do strongly feel that when this all kind of settles, maybe that's a year from now or 6 months from now, or who knows, I do feel like there's going to be a surge on hospitals to get all of these procedures taken care of that people may have, let it go to the wayside due to the whole COVID, or maybe people lost their jobs and they lost their insurance. In any event, when this all turns around, I have a very strong feeling that the traveling market is going to be very, very strong and open and in demand. So maybe if that's something you want to look into going forward. But I want you to kind of really think about why it is you're frustrated, and why you don't feel valued, and why you're having a hard time financially, and figure out what is the next step for you, and take advantage of this time to really make sure that it doesn't happen again, and move forward. So with that in mind, let's get into the other stuff. So I've come up with a list of projects to work on, and I kind of think everybody out there, I'm just talking to myself at this point, if I were to say things like, oh, work on your preference cards or your binders. We all know those projects. We all know you got to have your floor checks done. We all know that you got to make sure your equipment's tagged and up to date. We all know that you got to go through your your supplies and make sure nothing's expired. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. I'm talking about stuff that might spark the ear of your boss and get you more hours. Something that's budget neutral, or something that's budget friendly, like going through your supplies with expirations with 3 to 6 months out, and trying to rotate that stock out with the vendors that give it to you. And hopefully they'll do that. I mean, they're going to have nothing but time on their hands too, because if you're slow, they're slow. But all in all, I just want you to think about these budget-friendly projects and how they affect the bottom line. And maybe you can argue your way into working while, you save the hospital money in a different way. I think that one's a really good one. I think another one that's really good is saving money uh, on your on your budget by buying less. I mean, identify what you really need, and maybe you go through and just lighten the shelves a bit and kind of get rid of some of this extra peripheral stuff that expires over time anyway. I think that's well worth your time. We all know that there's that doctor who has to have this and has to have that. Well, if he's not coming to your hospital, maybe it's a good time to approach your manager and be like, he hasn't been here in 5 months. Let's get rid of all this stuff that he wants, and maybe we'll just keep one or two instead of seven, and save yourself some money. Maybe you can get some refunds on that. I think that's another smart project that will get some attention. I think what you need to understand too is what is, at each level, what is each boss being motivated by? What is their agenda? Is it just to save staff hours, or are they being tasked with just saving money? And each person's looking at it like, well, the easiest ways to do that was with, staff wages, which it is. But, I think we need to kind of talk about how can you appeal to your boss? Like, if you can appeal to them and make them understand that team dynamics is super important, and it's really important to be able to have a good, stable team taking care of these people, and that your experiences are worth it. I think it's worth the effort to have that conversation and figure out what do they need. And I think everybody going into this, we all got to take a step back too. If we're concerned about our wages and our hours, just know that if they're going, this can only go so far, because ultimately they need people to do these procedures. And if you're being looked at this way, middle management and upper management's being looked at the same way, they could be the target of furloughs and so forth. So don't be so mad, and try not to be so negative. I know I am, and I've heard that it got old, so I'm going to try and be less negative. We'll give it a shot. So when we start talking to them about finding projects, I think there's a couple of different ways. Why I'm asking about, their motivations is, like, is there something that you can do in the department that's easily justifiable? Like, I want to work on turnover times project. It's a great project to reduce your turnover times, and by identifying each member's role and so forth, and really taking the time to go through it. And if you can drop your turnover time by 12 or 13 minutes, you might be able to add a procedure to the end of the day, when you're back up and stuff, and have all your cases back, and it's going to make everybody look good. But they might want numbers now, so something like that might not exactly be the quickest answer, because if they're looking for, I need numbers now, then your reduction in supplies and outdates and rotating your stock out with your vendors is going to be a much more amenable project. Depending on what your manager feels is important, I don't know if you're going to be able to wiggle an ER time, STEMI times project, or a patient flow project in. You might be able to, but if your manager and director are really into like quality improvement and patient satisfaction, sometimes you're able to wiggle one of those projects into something like now. We did a groin project or an access site project where we followed up on these patients a day later to see how many hematomas, what was the size, what was, big of each access site. And so we would follow up the patients in-house if they were still in-house, or we would call them at home. And as a side note to that project, our patient satisfaction scores shot through the roof because the patients really loved that. They really felt that we cared. They got to see a familiar face again. And a lot of times they asked us questions that didn't get answered, or we had the information that nobody else had, because sometimes that happens, and they really liked that. And so, that kind of patient satisfaction quality project, sometimes there's enough room in the budget to get one of those going, and that is a great one for the Cath lab. Obviously, you're going to want to make sure all your equipment's up to date, those kind of things like that. A lot of housekeeping, like I said, it depends on the focus of your manager or director. These are some projects that'll kind of buy you some time. That general housekeeping that people kind of forget about, like checking the tags to make sure your equipment's been, it's got a PM sticker on it. Those things are good. And getting the things fixed that you need to get fixed. Again, those projects really, everybody's supposed to do them. But maybe a good once over in the lab might buy you an afternoon or something like that from some hours, and honestly get those guys in facilities and clinical engineering some hours. Beyond that, if they're really lenient, I think one of the ones that I would love to do is whoever makes your pack, your Cath pack or your IR pack, reviewing and modifying the contents. If you're at least allowed to work on it, this is a great project that can really change the flow of opening of table and making your STEMI times a little better. There's obviously team education and things like that I have a hard time selling in this dynamic environment that we're in, because I think that if your manager was going to let you work on projects, this stuff kind of comes up on its own. And also I think that it's just you're in a different scenario. If your boss is coming to you like, hey, let's get some projects rolling, then you're getting your hours, and I think that's great. So for those of us who aren't getting our hours and you really need to be creative and find things that are going to get to them, I think if you focus on whatever your organizational goals are, find out what those are and how much they mean to your boss or your director or the service line director, whoever. Find out what they want to be done. Like what's the hot topic right now? Is it patient falls? Is it, satisfaction scores? Is it infections? What are your organizational goals? Like what is that? And I know that everybody's got something different. Sometimes those align to your national patient safety goals. Sometimes they're very in line with JCO ideas. Sometimes they're in line with whatever your state and local regulators are looking for, or Medicare. But sometimes there aren't. Sometimes there's stuff that's really specific to your hospital and that makes them feel good. And the reason why I bring it up is because those kind of organizational goals look really good in conversations at the C-suite level. And I have personally delivered a presentation to a C-suite before on an organizational goal that I did that involved patient safety, and they all loved it. And they all clapped, and it was silly, but they loved it. And those are the people deciding who gets hours. Those are the people who are deciding where the budget goes. So if you can make a project that is going to appeal to that C-suite because it meets an organizational goal, or you're going after one corner of the mission goals or the mission statement, and you pick one of those out and you make your project like, going over access sites and trying to get up your patient satisfaction scores. If that's been an issue in your department and it means something to your director, it doesn't necessarily have a monetary value to it, which seems like it's the only focus right now. But if it has that kind of impact to where they think it's important and could eventually impact their monetary status with, higher reimbursements or things of that nature, then it might work out. Also, in addition, I kind of already mentioned the national hospital patient safety goals, reducing infection rates. There's a whole list of them on JCO's website about things that everybody's trying to cut back on and what Medicare is looking for. I think if you kind of pitch a project in that direction, where this is like the basis of your project and this is how it applies, it's not only going to be A, it's going to pitch itself, but B, it's going to help kind of give you a guideline of what you're looking for. I think that may be helpful. So let's back this up a little bit. In full transparency, most of that didn't work for me. So there's going to be some places that just say no. So what do? I think you start to see begging to the physicians about, hey, maybe you drag your feet a little bit. I'm not looking for that. I think that I've kind of gone in a different direction of figuring out what's important to me, as I mentioned earlier, and maybe kind of look outside the box to different opportunities at other hospitals. I think those types of things may need to happen, because ultimately, if this is a long-term thing and you can only beat your head up against the wall for so long, and some of us can't afford this type of thing forever. Some hospitals just aren't going to come back the way that we hope they will. Some of them will bounce back. And you really need to kind of take a deep look into this and figure out, like, if this is where we are now, where are we going to be in 3 months? And maybe you ask the director that question. Maybe when you start to see management roll out of the place like it's a burning building, you figure out maybe it's time to roll out too. But honestly, I think it's time that we all take responsibility for how we're feeling about it and what we're going to do about it. And I think on the other side of this, as I mentioned earlier, or maybe I didn't, I think that getting ready to travel or apply for a different position, it's not always the answer. Sometimes just buckling down, saving some money, and just kind of cutting back on your expenses and riding this one out, that might be the way to go. I know a lot of people doing that. On the other side of it, if this has happened to you once in 2008, 2009, now it's happening to you again, and you want to codify your security at a hospital and make yourself, non-replaceable, however you say that, this is the time to do it. This is the time to get all the certifications, get into something that nobody else is doing, become the expert in the thing nobody wants to do, and make it so they can't replace you if you leave, and make them know how valuable you are, or find another place that will value you that way. So I think that's kind of like the most depressing way to kind of cap this off, but it's true. I think that we kind of need to just be ready for that. Like, I know that I have beaten my head against the brick wall for a good 2.5, 3 months. I was on paternity leave for a while. When I came back, there was no hours. So I think we need to move into the direction of, once you have gone to the well and it is dry, where do we go? And I think the obvious answer is to, go to another well. And I'll let you know how that goes with me. But I think that things are turning around for me at my hospital, and I hope that they turn around for you at yours. And if you have any other ideas about how to get your hours, besides donating blood and, trying to get per diem work, because per diem work isn't always the answer. If it's slow in one area, it's usually slow enough to where there's not a whole lot of per diem jobs out there. I know that I've had a fair amount of people tell me they're no longer in the industry in Cath Lab Lounge. I've had a fair amount of people say that they've kind of started to find interesting ways to save money through some apps out there, I guess, that can help you save some dollars here and there. And I think that some people are taking advantage of it and spending more time at home with the kids. And I think that there's a whole other world out there to kind of be explored outside of our little silos. I know that I'm trying to take more time to get to know the other people in my community around us, to help break down those walls in the local area, but also understanding that internationally there's other opportunities out there. And we've seen those people pop up on Cath Lab Lounge. So maybe it's time to take a chance when this is all said and done. Or if you can't make it that long, then I don't really have a great answer for you. I don't. I think that there are places that are busy, and reach out on Cath Lab Lounge and see if you can find one with work. I've heard Eisenhower Hospital in Southern California is looking for help. And I think there are places here and there. So if you can't make it to the other side of this without jumping ship, then start working on it now. But for me, I would want to make sure that I'm never in this scenario never in this scenario again, the best way that I can. And I thought I've insulated myself pretty good, but obviously not enough. So I'm going to continue to make sure that I work on myself moving forward, so that I am so valuable that they can't do this to me. But I'm in a union, so everybody's the same. But thank you guys for listening, and I hope to hear your ideas, your feedback. I hope this was helpful. And I hope that we all kind of get through this together. I have some other ideas for podcasts. I want to do a dad podcast for those of us who became dads while in the lab, and how that worked out as far as on call. I was going to talk to Rob, and he's a contractor with TZ Medical. He's come up with some really good ideas. And I'm holding off on that right now just because of the current climate. And I've had some other things pop up, but maybe I'm going to get a vendor on here to help us navigate through the next portion of this, which is transitioning, if you choose to, into vendor side of life and the manufacturing side and go in industry. And I think that's a great outlet. So hopefully we will have one of those guys on shortly. So thank you all for listening. And I hope those of you who are really into YouTube have enjoyed the video portion of this. I'm a horrible video editor, so sorry for that. And we'll talk again soon. Thanks, guys.